IMAX shares saw healthy growth in the first quarter. In fact, the stock up today, actually. The entertainment technology leader posted its highest grossing Q1 ever, as well as its greatest first quarter market share. CEO Richard Gelfond noted on the conference call that the business is more global than ever. He's with us today, as many of its signings for new IMAX systems came from high-value international markets, and a third of its global box office was driven by non-Hollywood films. He joins us now in studio to discuss. Let's get right into it. What is the takeaway that we should have from your latest report?
I think, you summarized it really well. It's becoming internationally more and more global. IMAX is in 90 countries today. Our signings, you mentioned, we had 63 signings through the end of April, which all of last year we had 47. So, that just shows you our global momentum. They were in places like the Philippines, Indonesia, Japan. We had a lot because those markets are really booming. And 1/3 of our box office in the first quarter was from international foreign language films.
Right.
So Japan, India, China. But it wasn't only Japan in Japan or India in India. There's a film in Japan called Slam Dunk, which did $5.5 million in China the next weekend. They packaged some TV shows in Japan called Demon Slayer, and it did $1 million in Korea. So this is kind of a new global trend, which is making IMAX more than just Hollywood blockbusters, but global blockbusters.
Right, and I know our Ali Canal has some questions for you too.
Yes, Richard, so given that your business is so global, how do you approach an event like the Hollywood writer's strike, for example? Are you more insulated from that impact considering this international focus?
Yeah, we're definitely more insulated. As I said, because about 1/3 of the revenues in the first quarter were from foreign language films. I think nobody's completely insulated. However, the movie slate for this year is pretty well locked. So again, IMAX does Hollywood blockbusters, and those aren't ones, hopefully, if you're a studio, that aren't being cobbled together at the last second. So things like Fast 10, Mission Impossible, Oppenheimer, they're largely in the can. Dune is done shooting and it's being edited. So, for films coming out this year, the strike really doesn't have an impact. It's a question of how long it goes on for and what happens next year. The good news on that, I think people have been anticipating it. So I think a lot's been written for next year. So we'll have to watch it just like you do.
How early on in the process of even conception of a new title or any content do you get involved in conversations where possible? Because that's a different type of production that production studios have to consider, that videographers, anything that's going into any type of entertainment piece that would be displayed in an IMAX platform.
It depends on who the filmmaker is, Brad. So if it's Chris Nolan or it's Denis Villeneuve, and part of their vision is the IMAX of it all. So we may find out 2 years earlier or 3 years earlier. And in the case of Oppenheimer, we have an IMAX team kind of embedded in Chris's production crew, just so he can maximize the IMAX opportunity. If it's another kind of film, I'm trying to think, more like Indiana Jones, which is coming out, which I've heard great things about. That's one that it's not shot specifically for IMAX, so that typically will get involved 6 months before.
And Richard, I know you're very bullish on the comeback of theaters, and there's reason to be, right? The Super Mario Brothers movie just surpassed $1 billion globally after debuting in Japan. We have that strong slate coming out this summer. But you were just at CinemaCon, which gathered the top industry executives, the top exhibitors. What is still a concern in your industry right now?
So, Ali, you may remember, because we've talked a lot, that I was bullish before this all turned around. Because I think a pandemic doesn't change 100 years of behavior. At CinemaCon, I think it varied by region. So I think China, which just came out of lockdown in December, is doing well, but it's not back full bore. I think the rest of the world, Southeast Asia and Europe, they're just killing it. Places like France, Japan, other places in Southeast Asia, Taiwan, India, they're all back. And I think the U.S. is somewhere like, in my opinion, 85% back. I think the pandemic doesn't keep people at home, but a lot of the exhibitors in the U.S. who license our technology, had a tough go of it. So I think they're coming back a little slower. With that said, we had our biggest signing in the U.S. in a decade that we announced as part of our quarter. So I think we're starting to see positive signs. The other thing about CinemaCon, I think people are really upbeat about the slate. I mean, April, the only big movie was Mario. But for example, our box office is more than double last year for not what you would think. But here we are, Guardians of the Galaxy is coming up this week. Then Fast and Furious right after that, then Little Mermaid, then Flash, which got terrific reviews coming out of CinemaCon, and then you go into Indiana Jones, and you go into Mission Impossible, and there's so many, I'm missing some of them.
That's all right. I know you're trying to go through your brain to come up with all of them. There's so many coming up. But one thing, so obviously we knew Avatar: Way of the Water was a huge hit, blockbuster film. Creed was an unusual choice for choosing IMAX. Do you see, or what are your expectations for more films taking that path?
Well, I mean, I think you chose a really good example because Creed was a sports film. We'd never really done one before. But I think that Michael B. Jordan really wanted to do something that would make the film stand out from the pack. And that's kind of what IMAX does. We're a global curator of films. So when people see, wow, it's an IMAX, they think it's something really special. And actually, I had the privilege of getting to know Michael through the process, back to your question, Brad, because he was filming with IMAX cameras. That's one where we were involved for a while. And
you gave him the workout process for Creed, right? He can credit you for that.
I told him I'll kick his butt if he doesn't do a good job.
His regimen.
He wasn't very worried, though. I don't know why. I can't understand it.
Well, I'm still waiting for that intro, right? You're going to intro me to Michael B. Right?
We're going to have to fight over this
exactly.
one, Allie. I'm sorry.
Well, Richard, real quick, you said the U.S. is about 85% back. What will it take to get to that 100%? And when can we expect to reach pre-pandemic levels?
I think probably later this year or next year. One of the really good developments is people like companies like Apple and Amazon are releasing films theatrically first. The narrative that to go right to streaming has been thrown away. Like that experiment just didn't work. It failed. So one of the big things about CinemaCon, which you asked about a minute ago, was the Scorsese film is coming out first on Paramount. Then it's going to streaming. Napoleon is going through Sony. Then it's coming out in streaming. Creed, which you mentioned, was an Amazon MGM release. So theatrical has lost some movies because the mid-level movies are going to streaming. But they're gaining movies now from streaming. And, some of those movies like Napoleon and the Scorsese movie look fantastic. So I think that'll fill in that gap. There'll just be a little lag.
When you look at the consumer environment right now, consumers are looking to where they can cut costs. And unfortunately, it's also a question of, okay, can we pay for an IMAX experience versus just seeing the normal run-of-the-mill movie experience? So how do you discuss with your partners how to make it more economical for consumers who want to go see these titles? Well,
the exhibitors set the price. We license our technology for a percentage of the box office, but they set the price. And I think, frankly, because of inflation, right now it's been fairly easy for them.
Do you think it's excuse-flation on their part to keep the price higher?
Well, I mean, you look at their financials, I wouldn't say so. They'd have a tough go of it. I think it's make up for pandemic inflation rather than excuse inflation. But movies are still a very affordable kind of entertainment, even IMAX movies are. You compare it, I don't know about you, but when I go to a restaurant, I'm like shocked. Or I buy an airline ticket, I say, there must be a problem. There's an extra zero on that ticket. So that kind of thing you kind of give up. But I think going to the movies, it's a way to get away. And look, we just talked about Super Mario Brothers. That's an animated film. And for IMAX, our market share on opening weekend for that was 8%. Whereas for Frozen, it was 6% years ago. So I think people are really in, post-pandemic, doing something special, getting out of the house, paying for the best, same kind of trends you're seeing in concert and sports. So I think there's less price sensitivity than you would think.
That, Richard, is what we call a Mario party. Richard Gelfond, who is IMAX CEO and Yahoo Finance's own. Allie Canal. Allie, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Richard, thanks for joining us in studio.
You.
Great to have you.
Thank you so much.